Thank you, everyone, for joining us for today's presentation, Beyond Simple A/B Testing. My name is Mario Kyriakou, one of the founders at Ratio, who presented today's webinar. I'm not going to talk about us at all because everyone's here for today's presentation. So we always hate presentations where the presenter always drones on about what they do and how they do it. So I'm going to ignore all that. We're going to go straight on to today's presentation. Today, the presenter is my erstwhile colleague, Douglas Morris, our Digital Optimization Director here at Ratio, who will be leading you through what you can be doing as an organization to go beyond just simple, basic A/B testing and the different processes, methodology that you need to put in place. We will have time for a Q&A at the end of today's presentation. If you do have questions, feel free to pop these into the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. And at the end of today's presentation, we'll go through those one by one and endeavour to answer them as concisely and as detailed as we can within the time remaining. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Doug.
Thanks very much, Mario. Okay, so the first thing is why we think that this webinar today is important. And that is that we speak to a lot of organizations that are maybe starting to dabble in A/B testing, or maybe have been doing it for some time, but have challenges moving beyond kind of simple A/B tests around call to actions and button colors, and not knowing how to get the most out of this method of conversion rate optimization, which really can deliver and unlock tremendous value for most organizations. So what we've done in this webinar is to touch on some of the areas that you might look at or consider looking at that can really help you take your testing program to the next level and unlock some of that fantastic value that I'm talking about. So we have 5 topics today. The first one is around looking at optimizing your optimization program, or how you can improve your program performance over time, how you can support your innovation by developing processes and methodology to sit around it, the types of research that will give you the best experiment hypotheses and ultimately the best strategy, the sorts of capabilities that you need, that you really need in an optimization program to deliver great tests, and finally, when you're looking at the technology that drives all of this, what sort of questions should you be trying to ask and have answered to understand what's the most suitable product for your organization. So we'll jump straight into optimization. So there's a very natural tendency when we're looking at how our testing programs and our optimization is going to focus on the outputs of the work, being the conversion rate increases or average order value, customer satisfaction, repeat purchase, et cetera, et cetera. There are many different metrics we could be looking to optimize, but none of these really give us an understanding of what we can do to drive more from the program as a whole. None of them really help us understand where the program as a whole is going well or poorly. It only really tells us whether that individual test did well or poorly. So what we really need to do is to develop a set of metrics, a set of performance metrics that help us understand where the weak points are in our program as a whole. And so we're not just reporting on how any one individual experiment happened to go. And that's what really sets a kind of a best-in-class optimization program apart from a standard optimization program, because you're not just optimizing the tests themselves, you're optimizing the program as well. So let's look at what some of those metrics might look like. The first metric is test capacity. So obviously, the more experiments that we run, provided that they are effective, the more results we're going to deliver from our program. So test capacity helps us understand that kind of upper limit of how many tests we could be running. The formula looks like this, which is to divide 52 by the average test duration in weeks. So that helps us understand essentially if we could only run one test at a time, how many tests we could be running in a year. And then we multiply that by the number of simultaneously testable funnels or pages that we have on our website. And that gives us the total number of tests that we could be running in a given 12-month period. Where I say simultaneously testable funnels or pages, I won't go into a great deal of detail around that in today's presentation, but it essentially means that if you have a couple of pages that are linked together in some way, like a checkout funnel, sometimes it's not a good idea to run multiple tests on different parts of that funnel at the same time, because it may make it hard to work out what actually drove the result. So what that would look like then, if it happens that on my website I have an average test duration of 5 weeks, I have 5 simultaneously testable funnels or pages. The math of that works out to 52 tests as an annual capacity. So if I was running 10 tests a year, then I would know that I've got a lot of headroom to push my optimization program harder. If I was running 45 tests a year or 50 tests, I could probably be quite satisfied with how much work we were doing in order to capitalize on this great opportunity, which is optimization. The second metric is test velocity. So where test capacity lets us know how many experiments we can be running, test velocity tells us how many we have been running. So the difference between these two is essentially the headroom for improvement. So test velocity helps us understand how well we've capitalized on our opportunities. So what you'd be looking to do is to create a tracker which shows over time how many tests you're running in any given month versus what the capacity was in that month. And ideally, you'd be seeing an increasing trend over time. If you're not seeing an increasing trend over time, you've got 2 options, one of which is to put more resources into your program. The other is to work out how you can do more with less, which is what we'll be touching on shortly. One great metric that I love is around 0 tests. So it's a horrible thing when there's 0 tests live on your website at a time, because if you have traffic that's hitting the website, particularly if it's paid traffic, and that traffic is not seeing a test, that's a missed opportunity, and that's a permanently missed opportunity. So having this tracker around how many days it's been since the last time you had 0 experiments live on your website will really help to embed that culture of always be testing, essentially, and always making sure that you're capitalizing on that traffic that you come into your website, which is really an opportunity. One great way I've heard it put is that traffic is the currency that you use to pay for tests. And if you have traffic hitting your website and it's not being used to pay for a test, it's lost currency. Of course, we're not just concerned about whether we're running tests, we're concerned about whether those tests are actually doing something to deliver value to the organization, or in other words, whether they're winning or not. And that's something that we should also be monitoring, which is around the quality of the experiments delivered, not just the quantity. So again, I would suggest that you set up a tracker and measure from month to month what percentage of your tests, one, lost or were inconclusive in that month. And hopefully, again, you'll see that as time goes on and your optimization program becomes more mature, that win rate will increase. If it doesn't, then maybe you have some work to do on the quality of the hypotheses that's going into the tests that you're running on your website. Essentially, monitoring this keeps our finger on the pulse of the test quality that's running. The next topic that I want to talk about is around processes and methodology. And these really are a key lever in your quest to improve the experiment velocity. So we've already kind of said that the more tests that you're running, the better, all else equal. So whatever we can do to run more tests, particularly with the same amount of resources, which are probably finite for most of us, is a win. So in that way, I really believe that processes and robust processes support innovation rather than stifle it, because they let us do more of it, essentially. So what I'll do is touch on some examples of processes that can sit around an optimization program. Of course, there's many, but you'll hopefully have some takeaways around things that you could do within your own optimization work. So the first one, and one that we employ a lot at Ratio, is an experimentation charter. So an experimentation charter is a document which lays out, essentially in really explicit detail, why and how you're going to be running the optimization program. The goal here is that you do this right at the very start of the project, right at the kickoff, and you get everyone in alignment around this document. And when that's the case, and when you have as much buy-in as possible, then you're going to have a much higher likelihood of things running smoothly and to plan, not having people pushing back on getting work when they've already committed to a time frame that they'll be able to deliver it in this charter. So, for example, within the optimization or experimentation charter, you'd be defining the roles and responsibilities. So who is responsible for doing the post-test analysis? How long will they have to do that from the time that the test finishes, etc. You'd map out in quite extensive detail what the experimentation process is from the time that you've ideated a hypothesis to the time that it goes live and the time that it is completed and analyzed. And very importantly, you'd agree on which stakeholders are involved at each step of that process and what their committed turnaround time is. So as I said, at the very beginning of the project, you're getting buy-in from everyone involved as to what everyone can realistically expect to deliver. What you'd look to do is not just have this as a document that you produce once and forget about, but ideally you'd have a meeting every month, every 2 months, every 3 months, and say, hey, how is our process actually working? We kind of agreed that design would take 1 week, but we've seen that normally designs are taking 2 weeks to come back. Are there any bottlenecks there that that we can work around? The second thing that you should be looking to doing is structuring your project around a centralized project management tool. Even if it's a free tool like Trello, which is actually pretty fantastic for a free tool. So within that tool, you should be building out a workflow that matches the process that everyone signed up to in your optimization charter. And then everyone has visibility over what's happening and where any given step is, any given test is rather, at any given moment of time, when they can expect it to be handed over to them. There'll be a full log of comments, concerns around each of the tests and so on. So this is rather than having things going back and forth via email, having some members of the team not being looped in on every bit of communications around it, I'd really strongly encourage you to get a tool to actually manage this process. Another example of a process that you consider put around optimization is a QA checklist. So having a thorough QA checklist will essentially help mean that QA goes faster because there's a defined list of things that you're looking to QA for each experiment. But also very importantly, it'll minimize any mistakes that are made through human oversight. And that'll mean there's no chances of a test going live and then 2 weeks later having to be pulled down and all of a sudden you've lost all of that data because the results are invalidated. The fourth example I'd like to touch on is around post-test analysis. This is a very important step that is unfortunately missed a lot of the time, is not just running a test and getting the result from the testing tool, but scratching a lot deeper beneath the surface to understand what happened with the test versus what you expected to happen with your test hypotheses. And then the second part of this is to actually make sure that this information is recorded somewhere for posterity, because it really is, like, oftentimes the most value that you'll get out of a test is not the fact that it won, but it's the learnings around things that happened or didn't happen versus what your expectations were. And if you're not actually recording this information somewhere where people in the future can come and access it, then you're not maximizing the value that you can derive from each of these experiments that you're completing. So you should be trying to come up with a set of kind of common questions that you'd be looking to answer after each test. Like, were there any customer segments that over or underperformed versus what we expected? What behaviors were influenced versus what we said we thought would happen in our hypotheses? What happened when we looked at voice of customer tools? Was there any additional insight around how people were behaving when we put this new banner in front of them that might be useful for people in the future, if not immediately when you're looking to iterate on that test after it's completed? And of course, when you're conducting your research, this is another area in which you can put processes and try and improve how effectively you're doing this over time. So, for example, if you're doing on-site surveys, you could do some A/B testing around how you're collecting the information there. You could try, when you're asking your visitors what their reason was for coming to the website, you could try going with a free text input versus a selection of answers with checkboxes. Maybe you'll find that one of those methods for collecting information has a particularly higher response rate or gets responses that are of a significantly higher value. And if that's the case, obviously it would be beneficial to build that into your process the next time that you're going to collect information. Or it could be that the particular way that you ask the question elicits responses of a different type from your customers. So essentially, it's not about just A/B testing with the tests themselves, but you should be looking at how you can optimize your actual optimization program and all of the work that sits around it, because all of that kind of optimization will also lead to greater value delivery down the line. The third topic I want to talk about, and probably one of the most meaningful, is around research and strategy. So all of us want to deliver amazing results to our organization using this optimization work, because that really is the potential that optimization has to deliver to almost any organization. But a lot of organizations, unfortunately, are still stuck at doing tests, as I said, like button color tests. And if we're wanting to deliver really meaningful results, that probably means delivering really meaningful changes in our users' behavior. And we can't really expect that without making meaningful changes to their user experience. And that's why tests like button color tests are really never going to be that effective in driving real value for you. As well, these test hypotheses around these meaningful changes you're making should be grounded in both qualitative and quantitative data, and I'll touch on that in a moment. So there's probably two main sources of information that you should be using to develop your test hypotheses. As I said, one of them is quantitative, which more than likely is going to be from your digital analytics data, Google Analytics, Adobe Analytics, Psycho Analytics. And that digital analytics data is going to tell you what is happening on your website. So it will be telling you that maybe people are dropping out between page A and page B, or people are or are not clicking the button on the bottom of the page. But digital analytics data will very rarely tell you why that is the case. And this is the pitfall that a lot of people fall into, is looking only at the digital analytics data and then applying their own view of the world onto that data to decide what the problem is behind the result that they're seeing, and therefore what the solution must be. It's critical in delivering a high probability hypotheses that you incorporate qualitative data as well, or in other words, asking your customers or trying to understand from your customers what their beliefs or thoughts were in that moment, because that's really going to tell you why you saw that dropout or why no one clicked that button. And that means that when we come up with a hypothesis, it's really grounded in something that's actually a problem rather than just something that we perceive to be a problem. And the solution will have a much higher chance of delivering some great results. So I want to provide an example of how these two methods can work really nicely together. So let's imagine on the right-hand side there that we have a responsive funnel. So this is for the responsive version of my nice e-commerce shop website. I'm selling clothing or something like that. And what digital analytics is really strong at is helping us size the opportunity. So for example, digital analytics is really strong at helping us understand where the biggest dropout is in this funnel. We can see that the dropout rate is 82% between the homepage and the category listing page, whereas the dropouts deeper in the funnel are only 25 and 20%. So immediately, just by having done this piece of analysis on my shop, I would know, well, hey, probably the biggest opportunity or the most headroom for me to try and improve things is between the homepage and the category listing page. If you don't have a traditional funnel like this, let's say you're a B2B organization rather than a nice and easy B2C transactional business, you can still look at, for example, what is the objective of a particular page and try and think about what metrics might help you evaluate how effectively that page is working. So if you have, for example, a really high-level solution page that then links off to some more granular information about more specific services that you offer, you could say that the purpose of that high-level solution page would be to introduce people to those more granular services, and therefore a metric for the effectiveness of that page could be what percentage of people actually move on to one of those more granular services. That's just an example. But certainly, even when you're not looking at a transactional business, you can put metrics around how your pages are performing in order to understand how much headroom there is to improve things. But let's push on with my my closed shop example. So if you have a really good implementation of your web analytics product, it cannot just tell you how people are moving between different pages on your website, but also help you isolate, even within the page, where they are or are not interacting. So in this scenario where we've seen that we have a really high dropout rate on the between the homepage and the category listing page, I might think to myself, well, the main method of people making it from the homepage to a category listing page is going to be the navigation menu. So let's look at how that's performing. So then we can create a new funnel, which is now specific to how users who landed on the homepage are actually making their way through the navigation menu. So now we can see, for example, that 80% of users clicked the hamburger navigation menu to open it. So we know that probably people understand that it's a navigation menu. There's not any UX barriers or a lack of understanding that they can open it. But only 35% opened the top level category in the navigation menu. And then 80% of the people who did open the top level category clicked through to one of the subcategories. So when we're looking at this, it again kind of points out where the problem might be. Still doesn't tell us exactly what the problem is. Again, that's why we need the qualitative information. But it does give us an area to focus our efforts when we're looking at that more voice of customer type of research. So let's pretend that my shop is Argos. That's my clothes shop. Let's pretend that I've just done some voice of customer analysis on my responsive navigation menu on my Argos website. And that was in the form of session replays or user testing. And maybe I found that when users are looking at this navigation menu, they don't actually understand or seem to understand that the categories there are actually links that can be clicked. Maybe I'd make the inference then that that's because there's no underlines or there's no iconography or anything like that, making it clear that it is clickable. But you can see that that's how you can really marry up that quantitative and the qualitative data. You can use the quantitative data to isolate where the biggest opportunities actually lie, and then the qualitative data helps you understand more around what the problems actually are in order to help you developing a solution. So just to help you out, I want to talk about some of my favorite voice of customer tools and what some of the common use cases are that you can go away and try for yourself. So, for example, user testing is a great website, usertesting.com. You can recruit people. It is paid, but you can test, for example, new designs on users and give them a set of questions to answer, or even a particular goal. And they will navigate through the design or through the journey that you built for them, and provide you with a running commentary of what their thoughts are, how they're reacting as they see different things. And it's particularly useful for trying to understand how different designs will work before you actually go to the extent of building them out and putting them into production. Because the whole aim of the game here is, again, to do more with less. And that can mean sometimes identifying problems before we even go to the extent of testing it. Secondly, what you'll probably find is that you will get some real gems if you talk to sales, customer service staff, or other frontline employees within your organization, because they are closer to the customer than anyone else. So they will understand that customers have called 100 times in the past month to repeat the same frustration with the website. They can't click a particular button, or they can't find a particular information, a piece of information rather. And sometimes you'll get gems like that that will just do phenomenal things for your conversion rate, really with very little effort. Secondly, if you're talking to sales and customer service staff, they know what the objections are of your customers. They'll know that customers have an objection to the price or the shipping or what have you, and they then will themselves have a method for overcoming that objection. And you can incorporate some of those, some of that language that your sales staff are using into the website in order to overcome that objection for visitors that never touch the contact center. Obviously, surveys, be it via email or on your site, are fantastic ways to gather information. One way to use them is to identify why visitors came to your website, and were they able to complete their goals? Were there any particular reasons that the users couldn't complete their goals? Pardon me. But something else that you can do is talk to customers around, that is, customers who actually did purchase, around, well, why did you buy from us rather than one of our competitors? And if you can uncover those reasons, which may be things you're not talking about at the moment, again, that can help you to get some more customers over the line. Finally, we have tools like visitor replay technology and heat and scroll maps, and they can really help add some context to that more quantitative data around what the actual customer behaviors are when they're sitting there on the web page. So are they having specific UX challenges, for example, or is it the case that they're missing key information within a page because it's in a position that no one ever scrolls to? Those tools are great for uncovering that sort of information. So with that all said around how to do things the right way, I want to talk about a cautionary tale around how not to approach optimization, and the danger of highest paid person's opinions, or HIPPOs. So this happened when I first started working in marketing at an e-commerce retailer in Australia. I won't mention the name. But we had this navigation menu on our website. And the navigation menu, we're a business, I should say, that sold activities. As you can see, some pretty cool ones like driving experiences, adventure sports, getaways, gourmet gifts, what have you. One of the navigation menu options that we had on our website was to browse by the product category. And this was something that was disliked quite vehemently by a lot of senior people in the organization. They either thought that it was a big opportunity because it hadn't been changed in a long time. That was the CEO's opinion. The head of marketing, my boss, thought that it looked dated and it wasn't on brand for what was an organization that really valued its brand. And the head of product had a lot of frustrations around the fact that where we actually had like 10 different subcategories within each primary category, we only ever listed 3. So they thought that it would make it harder for customers to actually find the right experience because we weren't listing all of them. Seems to make sense. So we embarked on a project to redesign and redevelop this navigation menu, and we came up with something that was really, really beautiful. So we had a navigation menu that laid out the primary categories with kind of an on-hover effect. So you could hover over adventure and up would pop all of the adventure subcategories. It would have all of them, of course, to address the concern of the header product. Beautiful imagery around each of those subcategories. You could just imagine, I'm sure, with these types of experiences, what kind of encapsulating image that we could use for each category. And of course, you would think that this must do a lot better job than the really boring, non-functional navigation menu over here, right? Especially when we've invested 2 months of design and development into the process. In fact, the test lost, and we actually had no idea why. We just had our own assumptions. We thought maybe it was because of X or Y or Z, but we really actually had no idea what customers were or were not doing. And I think that that process really gave me a lot of strong learnings around what you should and should not be doing in optimization. And I'm going to go through some of those learnings now. The first problem with our approach is that our hypotheses sucked, or in fact, we didn't even have one. The decision to rebuild the navigation menu wasn't based on a data-driven hypothesis with a strong understanding of customer complaints and problems. It was based on the opinions of the highest paid people in the organization. And when it comes to optimization, opinions simply are not good enough. The learning there is that good test hypotheses should always set out to solve actual customer problems, highlight or clarify your value proposition, reduce anxiety, or introduce urgency. So those are all some really good levers that will drive great results for you. But at a minimum, we should have set metrics to understand how the existing navigation menu is actually performing to validate whether it was an opportunity in the first place. There are some examples of other customer problems we might have come across if we were trying to uncover them, which might have given us other hypotheses that we would have developed instead. The second problem with our approach is that we never actually quantified that opportunity or tried to prioritize it against any others. So we didn't actually know whether that was a better use of 2 months of development and design work than any other opportunity that we might have worked on. So the fundamental learning here is that you should have a number of different things which you could be doing, and you should be trying to prioritize those based on how much you expect them to return versus how much effort you expect to expend in order to get the return. And you should be trying to come up with a score in order, as I said, to deliver the tests that have the least effort and the most return. So when I'm talking about expected effort, I'm also talking about things like, obviously there's like the technical complexity, but also you might be looking at whether any particular test might be a bit politically dangerous within your organization that might take more effort to get over the line in that respect. And in terms of the expected effort, you could be looking at trying to estimate what sort of uplift you could drive. So if it's a button color test, you'd probably say that the behavior change is going to be very minor, and therefore the potential for uplift is small. And finally, you'd want to be looking at the importance of the test, or the hypotheses rather. That could be in terms of the audience size. That is that while it's a test, yes, that has a small potential for uplift, it's on the home page, so it's being seen by a large percentage of the audience, and that could increase what the ultimate value of the win is. But also some things realistically are strategically important to the organization, and that's something that you should take into account there as well. The final learning is that we had no way of validating what behavior was actually occurring with the new navigation menu. And that's why we were back to our own assumptions to interpret the results. So the learning there is to make sure that you're thinking about what tracking you need to have in place to maximize the test learnings and really be able to iterate on your hypotheses. Very important that you have that additional tracking in place before your tests go live. Obviously, if you run the tests, you didn't have the tracking in place, then you'll be in exactly the same place that we were if your test loses or even if it wins, and you have no idea where to from here. So here are some takeaways relating to the research you should be doing and the strategy you should be trying to develop. You should be using digital analytics data to quantify and prioritize the key dropout points within your funnel. So what does my funnel look like? What are the key steps that I expect users to go through? Is there any particular part of that funnel that represents an absolutely urgent pressing need over the others? More often than not, if the headroom for optimization is twice as large, i.e. if the dropout rate is say 80% versus 40%, you're going to find it much easier to actually get some wins there versus a page where the dropout rate is lower rather. It's going to be much harder to actually find anything that wins. You should also be using digital analytics data to identify within each page possible drivers of the dropout or within each section of the funnel. But of course, as I said, you should not at that point be trying to determine what the problem is. That's where the customer research comes in. So you use customer research to identify the customer pain points and UX barriers, find out what customer objections are, and from customers who did buy from you, what are the persuasion elements that can help you overcome those, and try and understand how customers view your value proposition, not just how it's viewed internally, because that can help you kind of tweak it as to how you present it to other prospective customers. When you're developing your test hypotheses, you have to make sure to prioritize them, and again, like really make sure that you're integrating both the qual and the quant sort of data, because that's where you're going to come up with the real winning hypotheses, and absolutely make sure that you have enough tracking in place to get a complete understanding of the behaviors you influenced, win or lose. Oh dear. So the next thing that I want to go through is the sorts of skills that you have or you should look to be having in your optimization team in order to make sure that you're delivering the best results possible. The first one is you need someone who can act as the strategist. So that person should have a strong understanding of the business context. They should have skills in terms of user research to uncover that qualitative goal. They should be someone who's skilled at integrating those kind of disparate data sources in order to formulate hypotheses. And as with most people in optimization, they need to be both data-driven and creative, because data helps you identify the problems, or being data-driven helps you identify the problems, and being creative helps you come up with those great solutions. You should have an analyst within your optimization team. So this needs to be someone with really, really strong understanding of your web analytics platform. And ideally, they should be used to using it for kind of deep dive analysis of customer journeys, not just reporting from month to month, say, on how our marketing channels performing. It's really important that this person has a strong understanding of how to use segmentation to identify patterns and stories behind top line numbers, because it really is that kind of segmentation that's going to help you understand the performance of a test once it's finished. And it should be someone as well who has a good command of statistics, like statistical significance of power, probability, sample sizes, etc. Because someone in the team should have that understanding in order to help interpret the results. You're going to need a designer who can translate the test hypotheses into designs. They should have a strong understanding of persuasive design principles, and of course these days it needs to be someone who understands responsive design as well. You need a copywriter, someone who can translate those user research findings into persuasive copy, which also adheres to your brand's tone and style. It's quite important that they understand the buyer journey, and particularly have an understanding of the fact that you do write differently according to where someone is within that funnel stage, like how you talk to them and what you talk to them about would be different. They'd want to be familiar with any industry-specific language that you have and comfortable with SEO principles. And finally, to unlock it all, you really do need a developer. So modern A/B testing platforms are fantastic because you can do a lot without development, even to the point where you can move elements around on the page, add and remove copied images, etc. But at some point, you are going to start to exhaust those capabilities, and you're going to be wanting to do tests that are a bit more sophisticated. And at that point, you should be looking to bring in a front-end developer to the project who has strength in, obviously, HTML, CSS, JavaScript in order to execute on those more complex design changes. In terms of personality, it would be good to have someone who's comfortable with delivering kind of an MVP product, because sometimes you do just want to get something out the door to validate that the hypothesis is valid before going to the extent of building up the full product to be hard-coded in the production environment. It's not the case necessarily that you need 5 different people to fill those roles, although it is not necessarily realistic that one person can fill more than a couple. Often you'll see that someone who is a great front-end developer will also do some design. Similarly, you might see that someone who is great with data is also great with kind of developing the strategy that sits around what they've uncovered. But while there is some overlap, it's important that all of these skills are present in some way, because they're all really important in developing strong and winning test hypotheses. Finally, just to touch a bit on what you should be looking to ask in order to help you evaluate what technology vendor you should be going with. So firstly, is your priority more around A/B testing and optimization of individual touch points, or are you looking more at personalization of the entire customer journey? If it is the case that you're looking at personalization, can the technology link together the behavior between different touch points and devices over multiple visits? And can you use that information to drive personalization? There are some A/B testing tools on the market that claim to have personalization capabilities, but they're quite weak in terms of the sorts of targeting that you can do. It might just be based on device or marketing channel as opposed to what someone's done on the visit, or even more importantly, across multiple visits. If you're wanting to do optimization, it's really important that you have a solution that gives you the flexibility to easily alter the design and layout of different pages. And you should also consider whether the optimization project can be abstracted from your existing development efforts. Because obviously, if you have to work in line with the release cycles and the development resources of your technology team, then that's going to slow you down and limit that project velocity that you're trying to build up. Can the technology help you identify opportunities itself? So, for example, VWO, which is an A/B testing tool, has integrated voice of customer tools, so you can do like heat mapping and customer surveys and that sort of stuff, and build that all into your test hypotheses. And Sitecore is doing some really strong things in the way of machine learning in the latest version that's coming out, also to help you identify opportunities. Can the technology provide you with any other customer intelligence? And I guess, like, if you are looking at personalization, what's happening on the site is not the be-all and end-all of what you can personalize against. So how are you able to bring in other data sources like your CRM data and leverage that in personalization? So that is the end of today's presentation. If we have any questions now, we have some time to.
Thank you, Doug. Yes, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, if you've got any questions, just pop those into the chat bar on the side, and we will answer them now. I've got a question actually, just to kick-start this. We say beyond A/B testing, and in an ideal world, we would love to, and I know most people would love to actually run through each of these segments, but one of the questions I always hear is, we're at the early stage and we're trying to build a business case. Where would we start in order to prove that actually optimization generates value? I mean, we know we're big believers, but if you was to say to someone, where would you start? What would you recommend?
I think that's when it comes back to, I mean, if you're looking at one of those, let's say, for example, we're looking back at my clothes store example, and we've seen there's a massive dropout between the home page and the category page for people on mobile devices. Then in that scenario, for example, what I might try and do is benchmark the mobile dropout rate against the desktop dropout rate to give some sort of business case around where the headroom for optimization is. For example, if 80% of mobile users never make it to a category page, but only 30% of desktop users never make it to a category page, then we know that with a great experience, it's possible that we can get 70% of our mobile users to a category page rather than 20%. And that can help us start to business case some of the tests that we're doing in order to demonstrate kind of in dollar terms what some of the opportunity is available if we are to do some A/B testing around that.
Okay, thank you, Doug. It doesn't look like we've had any questions come in, so just leaves me to say thank you everyone for taking the time out of your day to join us for today's presentation. We did record the webinar, and I'll be sending out a link to this along with the slides in the next couple of days. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.